Alright, everybody, and we are back today discussing the Tennessee Titans, our final team in the AFC South and our second to last team in this 32 team series that we have been embarking on over the last month or so. And Tennessee really has had quite a bit of success in recent years. They are almost always in playoff contention and, in some instances, even competing for the Super Bowl. And it really is quite a remarkable turnaround because if we recall back to around 2014 here, when this team was 2-14, they end up with the second overall pick in the 2015 draft. And I remember there was some discussion of what they would do with that second overall pick in 2015. Obviously, they end up selecting quarterback Marcus Mariota, but the Titans needed pretty much everything at the time, and they were seen as a team that it was going to take them just so long to turn this thing around. They were starting quarterback Zach Mettenberger, if we could remember, for a few games back in 2014. And it was floated around for a little while that, well, maybe Tennessee could either take just the best available player with that second overall pick, or they could end up trading that pick for a boatload of draft picks, and they would just roll with Zach Mettenberger because it was just going to take that long to turn this thing around. However, Tennessee does end up getting back with a winning record by the 2016 season, so it takes them just 2 more years, and really they've known that as their standard ever since. Mike Vrabel takes over as head coach in 2018, and he brings with him a winning culture from his time with the New England Patriots. Then in 2019, rookie A.J. Brown enters the picture. Derrick Henry becomes the everyday back, although he technically did in 2018, but really came into his own in 2019. And they also had Ryan Tannehill, veteran acquisition, take over as their quarterback, which really just helped solidify this core for them of having playmakers on the offense and defensive side of the football, paired with excellent coaching. This was really where they came into their own, and they go to the conference championship game in 2019. They did have a 10-point lead in that game over the Kansas City Chiefs, but end up losing. And then in 2020, they lose a home playoff game to Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, revenge game from this 2019 playoff run. And then in 2021, they actually secure the first seed in the AFC at large, so they're the first seed in the AFC period, and they end up losing to the Cincinnati Bengals on a last-second field goal by Evan McPherson. Before last year, they finished with a 7-10 record, and their first losing season since 2015. So let's take a look at this 2022 Titans roster here to see really what went awry. Where did this go wrong? Why couldn't this team remain a perennial contender here? So looking at the 2022 Titans, of course coached by Mike Vrabel with a 7-10 record, and we can quickly see what the problem is here. This was a team that had a very poor offense and kind of a middling defense. And if we really want to break this down further, it becomes quite apparent what the actual problem is. They were an excellent team rushing the football and defending the rush. They were 11th in terms of rushing attempts, and they were right around a fringe top 10 team in terms of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. But when it comes to defending the run, they were the best team. They allowed the fewest rushing yards, even though they got ran against the second most out of any team. And they allowed the third fewest rushing touchdowns, and they allowed the fewest yards per carry to their opposition. So this was a stellar defense against the run. And they had a very solid rushing attack on offense as well. The problem? They were absolutely horrendous at throwing the football, and they were even worse at defending the pass. So they rank 30th in terms of passing yards, 28th in terms of passing touchdowns on offense, and then on defense, they were dead last in the National Football League when it came to passing yards allowed, and they were 28th in terms of passing touchdowns allowed. So playing in the AFC, where there's a lot of teams with excellent quarterbacks, a ton of tremendous wide receivers and tight ends, you need to be strong against the pass on defense, or at least passable, no pun intended. And the Titans simply weren't that, and that's going to cost them a lot of football games. So let's take a look at this 2022 schedule, because this really is quite fascinating. Oh, I did also want to mention too, before we break down the schedule, they were third for their defense at least. They had the third best percentage at getting off the field on third downs. They were excellent at getting off the field on third down, but if they were put into a fourth down situation, they were dead last in the National Football League. So the Titans were likely stopping you on third down if you were an opposing offense. However, if you went for it on fourth down, odds are you were going to be able to convert. Just thought that was interesting to note. So looking now at the schedule for real, and this is a really bizarre trajectory, I guess we could call it, for the Titans, because they start out 0-2 with two pretty different losses here in the first 2 weeks. Week 1, they're at home against the New York Giants, and they lose by 1 point. Okay, that's disappointing. Tennessee probably saw themselves as the better team than the Giants going into last season, and they end up losing that first game. Although the second week on Monday night, they play the Buffalo Bills, two teams that have been in the playoffs the last few years. This should be a pretty evenly matched game. Buffalo wins by a score of 41-7, so Tennessee just gets their doors blown off, and now they're sitting with an 0-2 record. Things really aren't looking good. But then the weird part is, Tennessee wins 7 of their next 8 games here. They defeat the Las Vegas Raiders, Indianapolis Colts, Washington Commanders, then coming out of the bye, the Colts again, the Texans, lose to Kansas City in overtime, then defeat the Broncos and Packers. So you'll notice no playoff teams in there they were able to defeat. However, they did win these games, and as a result, as we're getting around point of Thanksgiving here in late November, the Titans are sitting pretty with a 7-3 record, and considering that the AFC South was probably the weakest division besides maybe the NFC South last year, the Titans are sitting good. They're thinking, well, we're probably winning this AFC South yet again, and we might even be pushing for the first seed in the AFC yet again. But then reality comes setting in, and the schedule definitely doesn't do them any favors here. The next 4 games against the Cincinnati Bengals, Philadelphia Eagles, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Los Angeles Chargers, all teams that would end up making the 2022 playoffs. Then they do get another matchup against the Houston Texans, but then wrap up against the Cowboys and Jaguars, 2 more playoff teams. So out of their last 7 games, 6 of those matchups are against eventual playoff teams. And the problem for the Titans is they lose all 7 of these games. So they lose to the Bengals, Eagles, Jaguars, Chargers, Texans, Cowboys, and Jaguars again, all in a row. As a result, finishing with a 7-10 record and missing the AFC playoffs altogether. And sadly enough, they were still in this by the time we got to the Saturday, January 7th matchup in prime time against the Jacksonville Jaguars. If they could have won this matchup against the Jaguars, they would have won the AFC South and made the postseason as the 4th seed. So, yeah, very unfortunate end to the 2022 Titans schedule here. So let's look at the individual stats now to see what really is going on. And definitely part of the problem is quarterback Ryan Tannehill. I'm not going to say he's a huge problem because he does only throw 6 interceptions in 12 starts, but he does also only throw 13 touchdowns in 12 starts. So for a starting quarterback in the AFC, you're going to need more than 1 touchdown pass a game when you have guys like Patrick Mahomes who are capable of throwing 3 touchdowns every single week. But unfortunately for the Titans, Ryan Tannehill doesn't even start all 17 games. They get a look at Josh Dobbs for 2 games. Doesn't really impress. 0-2 record. 2-2 in terms of touchdowns and interceptions. 411 passing yards. And then they even get 3 starts out of rookie Malik Willis, who was a quarterback that was seen as somebody that the Titans got good value on as a 3rd-round selection last year and could potentially develop into a successor for Ryan Tannehill for the starting job in Tennessee. So he comes in for 3 starts, and he really does not look good at all. Not even 300 yards total over 3 starts, 0 passing touchdowns to 3 interceptions. And that alone might have been enough for the Titans to say, yes, we've seen enough. He's not our guy of the future, as we'll see when we get to their 2023 draft. So, really not impressed by the quarterback play there by any of those guys. Looking at the ground game, of course they do have Derrick Henry, and he might be one of the few bell cow running backs left in the National Football League. And I would say he's certainly the poster child for what the running back position can be capable of in the modern NFL. While most of the teams in the AFC are built around a dominant passing game and elite quarterback, Tennessee is built firmly around Derrick Henry on offense and firmly still built through the running back position. Maybe one of the only teams you could say that is the case in the National Football League today. So Derrick Henry rushes the ball nearly 350 times in 16 games last year, over 1,500 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns. But on the flip side, not too involved in the receiving game. 33 receptions, just shy of 400 yards receiving and 0 receiving touchdowns. So when all said and done, sitting right around 2,000 all-purpose yards, 13 touchdowns. Take that all day. Absolutely one of, if not the best running back in the National Football League. Then looking at the receivers, and this is quite simply abysmal. Sorely missing A.J. Brown in this receiving core. Robert Woods leads the way with 527 yards. And granted, Tennessee does spread the ball around a lot here because their number 6 receiver, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, actually has 397 receiving yards, so only 130 receiving yards less than their number 1 receiver, and he was their number 6 receiver. They do have rookie Treylon Burks in the middle here. In 11 games with 444 yards and a touchdown, he's probably going to be their number 1 this year, or at the very least their number 2. They definitely want him to step up and be one of the primary weapons on this offense going forward, but really not too much to be enthusiastic about in his rookie season. Then moving along down to the defense, and there's certainly a few notable players here as well. We have Danico Autry, Jeffrey Simmons, DeMarcus Walker, and Rashad Weaver. And honestly, I put Bud Dupree in there as well, even though he just played 11 games. All of these guys consistently getting to the quarterback, both in terms of sacks and quarterback hits, both getting their hands on the football with, well, all of them getting their hands on the football with forced fumbles or fumble recoveries, besides DeMarcus Walker, but he's actually the only player to have double digits for tackles for a loss. Then I'll also give a shout out to safety Kevin Byard, 4 interceptions after playing in all 17 games. And before we proceed, we'll give a shout out to Derrick Henry, Ben Jones, Jeffrey Simmons, and long snapper Morgan Cox for all making the Pro Bowl. So congratulations to those gentlemen. Moving forward to the 2023 Titans offseason, and definitely a lot going on here. Tennessee has definitely some notable departures, though none that I think are really going to be too much of a backbreaker for this team. They lose wide receiver Robert Woods to the Houston Texans. They lose tight end Austin Hooper to the Las Vegas Raiders, edge rusher Bud Dupree to the Atlanta Falcons, linebacker David Long Jr. to the Miami Dolphins, guard Dennis Daly to the Arizona Cardinals, guard Nate Davis to the Chicago Bears, as well as defensive lineman DeMarcus Walker to the Chicago Bears. So out of that bunch, I would say probably the most notable departures are Bud Dupree and DeMarcus Walker leaving on the defense, and then never a good thing to lose 2 offensive guards, obviously. So they're going to need to address the trenches here, absolutely, as we proceed with the offseason. And they don't waste any time doing that. In free agency, they do bring in tackle/guard Daniel Brunskill. He's listed as a guard here, but the Titans will probably be using him as their starting right tackle this season. Then they move on and to also bring in Azeez Al-Shaair from the San Francisco 49ers, a linebacker. He could be a potential replacement for David Long Jr. They also bring in cornerback Sean Murphy-Bunting from the Tampa Bay Bucks, and probably the biggest addition, wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Arizona Cardinals. DeAndre Hopkins is on the wrong side of 30 now, but we know what he's capable of. DeAndre Hopkins can be a very explosive receiver for them, although I do recall just a couple of years ago when the Tennessee Titans brought in a very elite receiver or formerly elite receiver on the wrong side of 30 in hopes that he could be a solid number 2 for them in Julio Jones, and it really didn't pan out. So definitely holding my breath on the DeAndre Hopkins hype with the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to need to see it first, but we do know he has the talent and certainly capable of having a big season if he stays on the field. His health is probably the most important factor here. We'll also mention defensive edge, Arden Key coming over from the division rival Jacksonville Jaguars, offensive tackle Andre Dillard coming from the Philadelphia Eagles, and then we have Nick Folk, the kicker, coming from the New England Patriots, and Chris Moore, wide receiver of division rival Houston Texans. So when all's said and done, definitely address some needs in this free agency class. They add a couple pieces to the offensive line. They get a pair of new tackles. They add another linebacker, and they bring in Arden Key, who could potentially be a replacement for Bud Dupree. Although Bud Dupree was very productive with the Tennessee Titans, had a nice run there, so definitely big shoes to fill. And Chris Moore, I do believe, could be some nice receiver depth for them behind Treylon Burks and DeAndre Hopkins. So, moving on to the Tennessee Titans 2023 draft. And this was definitely a very notable draft for the Tennessee Titans because I absolutely love the first couple selections here. This first pick with Peter Skoronski at 11th overall. He very well may be the best offensive lineman in this 2023 draft. Perhaps a little bit undersized, but Peter Skoronski can play either the offensive guard or offensive tackle position. And it would seem that in 2023, at least, as we'll see in a second, the Titans do anticipate using him at the offensive guard spot. Which is fine, because Tennessee does have a pretty poor offensive line otherwise, so he will give them some nice stability, will help out Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill big time. Then in the second round, they take quarterback Will Levis. They actually trade up for him, and Will Levis was somebody who was seen as one of the 4 primary quarterbacks in this draft, along with Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson. Of course, those other 3 players all go with the first 4 selections of the draft. Bryce Young goes first, CJ Stroud second, Anthony Richardson fourth. But Will Levis takes a tumble on draft day, and he falls to the second round, where the Titans give him a home here. And even if Will Levis doesn't pan out as a franchise quarterback, they took him in the second round, and they really didn't have to give up much to get him. So this is a very low risk, high reward kind of draft pick, and I like that a lot. You're going to need to take some risks at the NFL draft if you want to be successful. And rolling the dice on a player like Will Levis definitely fits the bill there. Especially as we'll see when we get to the contract situations with Ryan Tannehill, and considering his age, combined with the fact that Malik Willis was sort of a dud last year when he did play, Will Levis could be their quarterback of the future, as soon as 2024, honestly. Then looking at the rest of this draft, they take Tyjae Spears, running back in the 3rd round, and then 3 late round draft picks, a tight end, offensive lineman, and wide receiver. So, looking at how the Titans anticipate on putting this roster together. Start out, like always, at the quarterback position. And for this season at least, this is Ryan Tannehill's gig. And they do have Malik Willis listed as the number 2 and Will Levis as the number 3. Although, like I mentioned, if Ryan Tannehill does depart after the season, wouldn't be surprised if this is Will Levis's gig. And on the off chance Ryan Tannehill gets injured this season, and Malik Willis comes in and struggles yet again, I think he's going to have a very short leash, maybe 1-2 games tops, before they see what they have in Will Levis. Then at running back, we do have Derrick Henry, of course, as the starting running back, and Tyjae Spears, the rookie, as his backup, and really not too much beyond that. So expect Derrick Henry to have another heavy workload this season. Then we can look at tight end and Chikazium Okonkwo. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Second-year player there, and looks like he's pretty much their primary tight end. They do have Trayvon Wisco behind him, and the rookie Josh Weil as their third stringer. Although, don't really see them being utilized too much. Tennessee's definitely not a team to pass to the tight end a lot. These guys will probably have more of a blocking role for Derrick Henry if I had to go out on a limb. Then next we can look at this offensive line because honestly, this very well could be the worst offensive line in the National Football League, at least on paper. Really nothing here that's overly encouraging. Only one player here that I'm really enthusiastic about, and that's the rookie Peter Skoronski. And they have him listed as their starting left guard. The two veteran additions, Andre Dillard and Daniel Brunskill, at their offensive tackle positions. And I know Andre Dillard, I'm pretty familiar with him as I am a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and he was our first round pick back in 2019. Really didn't pan out, ended up losing his job to Jordan Mailata, a late round draft pick from the year before. And the Eagles have used him at guard as well, but really just isn't much of a game changer when he's in the lineup. So as a starting left tackle, I'm not entirely sold. And I know they probably don't want to put Peter Skoronski there due to his size, but I wouldn't be surprised if Peter Skoronski ends up taking one of these tackle positions. Or at the very least, they keep Peter Skoronski at guard, and then in a future draft, they take another tackle here. Because Daniel Brunskill is another player who played guard with the San Francisco 49ers and is probably a little bit undersized for the right tackle position. Definitely not overly enthusiastic about either of these offensive tackles. Then they do have Dylan Raduns at the starting right guard, third-year player drafted out of the second round, so Tennessee probably has a pretty good guard duo here, but definitely scratching my head when it comes to their tackle position. And then at center, they have Aaron Brewer listed here. Again, really not enthusiastic about that at all. This could be a really tough go about it for this Titans offense if they're not getting the protection they need. Especially considering they have a 35-year-old Ryan Tannehill at quarterback who's, even in his prime, wasn't the most skilled quarterback in the world. Definitely not one of the more athletic quarterbacks compared to what the standard is today. Maybe a little bit back when he came into the league in 2012, but when you have guys like Lamar Jackson out on the field, and honestly, even somebody like Patrick Mahomes, who I wouldn't say is an overly mobile quarterback, but compared to Ryan Tannehill, he makes Patrick Mahomes look like a mobile quarterback. So they're going to need more from this offensive line if they want to have success. And then looking at this wide receiver group, DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks is the 1-2 punch with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as their third wide receiver, along with Chris Moore and rookie Colton Dowdle, backing them up, and the undrafted rookie Kearis Jackson. So as a whole, this offense is kind of a mixed bag because of course Derrick Henry is a tremendous player, but outside of him, there's really not one guy jumping out at me here that is making me feel good about this offense. Left guard Peter Skoronski is probably the next closest thing, but if I'm talking about one offensive lineman potentially being a good option for them this year, that's not very encouraging. And then at wide receiver, don't love their pass catching options here for Ryan Tannehill. He doesn't have an A.J. Brown that he could fall back on. Maybe if DeAndre Hopkins can turn back the clock, it'll help him out. Or if Treylon Burks can speed up his development, that would certainly help. But his rookie season was just not encouraging enough for me to have a lot of faith in this unit. So this could be a team that's going to need to rely on their defense. And looking at this defense, we'll start off with the line, and they do run a 3-4. And all things considered, this is a pretty solid line considering they run a 3-4. I would say it's right on the brink of being a top 10 unit, might just make it inside the top 10. They have a starting three of Danico Autry, Tyre Tart, and of course Jeffrey Simmons, with Jaden Peavy and Naquan Jones backing them up. Definitely the standout player here is Jeffrey Simmons. Then looking at their linebacker position, four starters here. They have Arden Key, Aziz Al-Shair, Jack Gibbons, and Harold Landry III. So two veteran acquisitions in there, and I don't love this linebacker group, but I don't hate it. Their head coach, Mike Vrabel, was a former linebacker himself, so perhaps he can coach these guys up to a little bit beyond their potential. And paired with a strong defensive line, maybe this could be serviceable. And then we look at the secondary, and really not encouraged by this secondary either. This is probably one of the weaker units in the National Football League. I'm not going to say it's one of the worst. I'd say probably a bottom 10 unit, because they do have some solid players here, but there really isn't one star player on the secondary. So they have Christian Fulton and Sean Murphy Bunting as their starting corners, with Roger McCreary, second-year man, starting in the nickel, and then Kevin Byard and Amani Hooker as their starting safeties. So Kevin Byard's probably the best player here, but even then, I don't love either of these starting corners. Sean Murphy Bunting was serviceable when he was with the Tampa Bay Bucks, although going up against, say, Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk when they play the Jacksonville Jaguars twice a year, don't necessarily love that matchup. And then definitely when they have to go up against some of the better teams in the AFC, are you putting Sean Murphy Bunting on Jamar Chase? Are you putting him on Stephon Diggs? I mean, maybe you could put Christian Fulton on those guys, but I wouldn't feel too much more enthusiastic about that. Just kind of leaves me scratching my head, because this seems like yet another repeat of last year where this team's going to struggle to stop the pass. And when you have teams like, I mean, look around at the AFC. You have the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Bills, the Jets now, the Dolphins. These teams can sling the football. The Chargers, they can just put up points at will. And the Titans with this offense are going to have trouble to keep up with that if they're allowing points very quickly. This team is designed through the run, and that's definitely more advantageous to them when they're playing with a lead. If they have a 7-point lead, a 10-point lead, they can burn up the clock with long drives with Derrick Henry, and probably Tyjae Spears this year as well. Eat up some clock, put more points on the board, just kind of suffocate the other team. But if they're playing from behind, they really don't have that luxury. And looking at this defense, it really doesn't suggest to me that they can stop the pass be overly effective at stopping the pass. So let's look at this 2023 schedule. And I do have the Titans projected to finish 8-9, coming up just short in the AFC South. I actually have them with a 5-1 record in the AFC South. So let's go down here game by game. They start out week 1 with the New Orleans Saints, and I do believe the Titans are capable of defeating the New Orleans Saints. Although, after looking at both the Saints and the Titans rosters, honestly, I am probably more enthusiastic about the Saints roster. So we can definitely come back to this. But then they get hit with a tough 3-game stretch here. The Chargers, Browns, and Bengals. Don't see them winning any of those 3 matchups. They play the Colts in week 5, and I do believe they can defeat the Indianapolis Colts. Although before their bye in week 6, they get the Baltimore Ravens in London. Don't think that one's a victory. Coming out of the bye, do think they can defeat the Atlanta Falcons. Mike Vrabel will have the guys ready for that. But then they come back on a short week against another Mike Tomlin, and the Steelers are simply a better unit than this not Jacksonville Jaguars team, this Tennessee Titans team. And so I give the victory to the Steelers here. They then play the Bucks in week 10, and I do believe the Titans can defeat the Bucks. This will probably be a pretty evenly matched game. Wouldn't be surprised again, much like with the Saints game, if Tampa Bay could win this one. Then week 11 against the Jaguars. I do give this one to the Titans just because I think the Titans and the Jaguars probably split. I gave both victories to the road teams, but you could flip it to the home teams. Week 12, I do give the Panthers the victory over the Titans. Think Bryce Young will start to feel more comfortable in Frank Reich's offense by this point and start to really come into his own. And going up against a weak secondary like the Tennessee Titans, that's a favorable matchup for him. And while Tennessee could, in theory, keep up with the Panthers with their ground game, I don't know if it's going to be enough. I don't think that they're going to have a ton of success throwing the football against Carolina either, even though Carolina's secondary isn't overly fantastic either. This one could go either way, but I give the edge to the Panthers. Week 13, believe they sweep the Colts. Week 14, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are going to just run all over this defense on Monday night. Week 15, they get the better of the Texans. Week 16, Seattle should take this team. Week 18, they take the Texans again. And then finally, in Week 18, Jacksonville defeats the Titans in what could be another win-or-go-home game for the AFC South, although honestly not sure if it even gets to that point for the Titans. Maybe the Titans can have some upset victories over some of these better teams, but looking at the 7 victories, I do give the Titans. It's the New Orleans Saints, the Indianapolis Colts, the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Indianapolis Colts again, and the Houston Texans twice. So potentially they could lose to the Saints. Potentially they could lose to the Bucks. Although they could defeat the Carolina Panthers out of the games they lost. And then maybe they get one more upset in there somewhere. So that keeps them at the 7-10 record. I don't think they really do much better than that though. And going into this, I thought maybe Tennessee could challenge Jacksonville again for the division. And granted, Mike Vrabel is a very good coach, so I'm not going to sit here and say the Titans are definitely going to lose a ton of games this season and they're going to come up short and miss the playoffs by a wide margin. But after going through all 4 of these AFC South teams, honestly wouldn't be surprised if Houston maybe snags the 2nd spot in the division and maybe Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville definitely wins the division now. I wasn't entirely sold on that going into this, but I think this is Jacksonville's division to lose handedly. And they might even push for a better seed in the AFC. Will be difficult though because Jacksonville does have tough games outside of this division. So then finally, before we wrap up, we'll briefly go over these salary cap hits going forward. And Ryan Tannehill will start at quarterback. Ryan Tannehill is in a contract year, making $36 million this season and then a void year next year. So honestly, if this season goes south for the Tennessee Titans, a lot can change here. I think Ryan Tannehill could definitely be shown the door, and they turn the keys over to Will Levis. Then at the running back position, Derrick Henry, again in a contract year. Derrick Henry, he's up there in terms of the highest paid running back right now, and he's approaching age 30. He's certainly going to want to get paid again. I'd be curious if Tennessee decides to keep him because Derrick Henry is a legend in Tennessee. He's definitely been the face of their franchise. But if Tennessee really wants to just turn the page after this year and say, you know what, we're heading in the wrong direction. Maybe they end up 3rd in the AFC South. Say a team like Houston overtakes them and they're not even close to the Jaguars. Maybe they say, you know what, we're just going to let Tannehill and Derrick Henry walk and we're going to start this thing fresh. Entirely possible because they do have Tyjae Spears here who could be the running back for Will Levis. So the replacements are already in-house. And then they do have DeAndre Hopkins on a 2-year deal at wide receiver. Wouldn't hurt to keep him around potentially, although I'm sure if they wanted to get out of this contract early, they probably could. They do have Treylon Burks for another 3 seasons, plus a potential option, and really not too much else at the wide receiver position. Then they have both of their tight ends signed long-term, but like I said, these guys are more blocking tight ends than receiving. On the offensive line, virtually nothing invested here on the offensive line. Peter Skoronski is the only one really signed for long-term, and I guess Andre Dillard as well signed for 3 seasons, but other than that, this offensive line's pretty much a blank slate. Looking at the defense now, Jeffrey Simmons got the bag, much deserved there. probably one of their key pieces on defense going forward. And looking at linebacker, Harold Landry signed for the next several years at big money. Definitely going to be one of their key contributors as well, since they pretty much have nobody else invested here. And then Kevin Byard at safety, along with Amani Hooker, really their only notable cap hits in the secondary. So really looking at Tennessee, they have one defensive lineman, one linebacker, and two safeties that are going to be here long term. They have one solid offensive lineman to build around in Peter Skoronski. And then they also have potentially their quarterback of the future and the running back of the future in-house. I'd be interested to wonder if Mike Vrabel sticks around if the Titans season goes south, because I don't think he's done anything to lose his job, even if the Titans have an abysmal season this year. If I were the Titans front office, I would definitely try to keep Mike Vrabel. But I just wonder if they want to try to turn the page on this thing altogether. But I think Mike Vrabel, he's not attached to Ryan Tannehill by any means. I'm not going to, they're not a package deal. When Mike Vrabel came here, it wasn't even Ryan Tannehill as the starting quarterback. He wasn't even on the roster. It was Marcus Mariota. Maybe a little bit more so with Derrick Henry, but if he is enthusiastic about Tyjae Spears, who knows? Maybe this could be it for Tennessee this year as we know them, and we could see them really try to turn the page next year. Because you look at this division, you have Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson as your three opposing teams at quarterback. All of these teams have their firm quarterback of the future established, and they do have Will Levis in the building, so I have to imagine that he's going to see the field in a noticeable role at some point, whether it's by the end of this season or in 2024. And Derrick Henry's probably the bigger question. Maybe they do just hit him with the franchise tag, but it's entirely possible they just let him walk after this year and try to start this thing over fresh. Derrick Henry is at now probably after this season going to hit 2,000 carries. Most running backs hit a wall after 1,000 carries, and he is approaching that magic number of 30 years of age. So it's really all I got on the Titans. I'd love to hear from any Tennessee Titans fans out there, or really any AFC South fans out there. How do you think this division shakes out? Is this record accurate? Are the Titans going to be right there with the Jaguars at season's end? Or are the Titans going to win this division? Are the Titans going to be third in this division? If the Titans are third in this division, do you see them moving on from Tannehill after this year? What about Derrick Henry? Is this team just fundamentally built improperly for this season, like I mentioned? Are they going to have trouble stopping the pass and then not be able to dig themselves out of those deficits? Love to hear from you guys down below, and we will finish this thing off tomorrow with none other than the Washington Football Commanders team. So look forward to talking to you guys then.